To make Clay acting chair.
A second.
Great, I'll call that motion. shortly.
All in favor?
All in favor of that motion, that motion? Anyone opposed? Okay, cool. I will do my best. I said I would only do this if no one else volunteered. So here I am. Sorry, I knew I would be coming late from or maybe coming late from a faculty meeting, so I apologize for my tardiness. Are we, we're good?
Yep.
On the Zoom?
Yep.
Great. Well, I'll start with a land acknowledgement. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Iluhi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Okay. We will start with an agenda and materials review. Do we need to vote the agenda into being? Is that something that we have to do in this board? Okay, are there any changes to the agenda by anyone who was part of the agenda or anyone on the board? Those changes, we're good. Okay, seems like we can go.
Then the agenda.
Okay, I'll get there in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Should be good. Okay, great. We were provided minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any changes that board members would like to make to the minutes? Would someone like to move to approve the minutes then
I'll move to approve the minutes.
from our December meeting?
Yes.
Second.
Great. All in favor? Any opposed? None. Seeing none, that passes. Great. Okay, can we start with comments from board members and from our liaisons to other boards? Would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay, great.
I don't have much comment, although I might be stealing a little bit of your thunder. I watched the last police commission meeting and found that the cultural audit it's completed. But members of the police commission aren't getting access to it at this point, and the report is not being made public. There might be more on that. But that's basically what I got from that meeting and no other updates.
I don't have any comments. Every day in school.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being here despite your schedule. Yeah. Brittany?
Just wanted to acknowledge the state of our country is messy and complicated, and there's a lot of weight and feeling. And I know working in local government, I feel that, and living in this environment, I feel that, and just wanted to kind of call attention to what we may be bringing in with us in these conversations.
Great.
I have no comments.
Okay. I have no comments about that are general, but about the liaison, commission liaison. So yeah, I've been serving on the police commission as our liaison to the police commission, and the chief is actually here. So I wonder if, I don't know, do you want to give a background on the cultural audit? And sort of
I'm happy to
answer
do
that
that.
question, yeah,
So
very briefly.
Yeah, it's been a bit miscategorized. It's not a cultural audit, it's a culture audit, culture of the police department. So I don't want
Mhm.
to confuse it with what some may interpret the term cultural to be. That was completed by a group that's in state that has some deep lived experience in police departments. About 20% of our department was interviewed, so well over 60 individuals were interviewed with a lot of really good open-end questions to better understand what people are experiencing around the culture within the organization. From that, there has been several recommendations categorized in a couple of different buckets, everything from kind of really more urgent needs that we need to address all the way down to things that are not quite so urgent, but things we might want to pay attention to. If I remember correctly, I did share from a high level what those recommendations are. The question came up as to whether or not the report is going to be made available to people, and there is a provision actually in public records law that allows for that to be exempted, especially when it's got actual specific statements made by employees. And the reason they do that is if I'm likely never going to get anybody to come to the table and just about their feelings if it is a matter of public community. And so there is a provision to allow for to make sure there's not a chilling effect on being able to do this type of work in the fall. But I am happy to make available and the executive, essentially an executive summary that outlines kind of the recommendations that we're going to be undertaking. I'm happy also to report that a few of those recommendations were in process well before the report was submitted, and then there's some others that will be central to our 2025 work plan that senior staff is working on right now, amongst other things. And so it's a work in progress, moving forward, and a year from now, after 2025, I'm hopeful to be able to say that we were able to achieve many of the recommendations that were outlined in the report.
That's great. Thanks for doing that on the spot, Chief.
Can I also ask, how similar is this to the 2015 PERF report?
There's a few overlaps in the prior to my arrival, there was a PERF report. I remember seeing some of that. There's some of that stuff that's thematic that we saw in the PERF report, mostly around processes, continue to improve processes and those types of things. There's many of the things in the PERF report that have been accomplished, which is good around some of those processes that need to be improved. The one thing that the consultants were happy to point out is in any law enforcement organization, and many cultures, not just law enforcement, many law enforcement organizations, having the presence of microaggressions is not uncommon. Certainly not what we would hope, but not uncommon. But what they were able to say is they were not able to find any overt sexism, racism within the organization. And so they dug into that pretty deeply within the questions that they asked. And so through all of this, people shared their experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so that's what framed some of the recommendations that we were able to share. So
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about that from a perspective of the board member on the police commission is understanding the need to have an opportunity for employees in the police department to be able to voice their opinions and experiences without that necessarily being public. And I think that it is really important to have a process that that the chief can engage with the employees of the police department that way. And that is one of the reasons why we might have access to something like an executive summary, but not all like the raw data. And from working with previous police departments and bureaus, it really was a limiting factor when there would be sort of publicly displayed information about, all sorts of experiences. And sometimes they're something that you want to share if it's aggregate data, but not specific data to you as an individual or specific words coming from you. And so I do think it's something that we probably wrestle with on the police commission a little bit and we want more information probably, but I appreciate the fact that we also want to protect employees to be able to say what they are actually experiencing. So that was sort of the nuance that I felt was important.
I think one of the real strengths of this particular report was when you think about in a 24/7 organization to try and get a consultant in front of more than 60 different employees. was a heavy lift. It took a long time to do that, but we all felt like it was really important to have that sampling to be very, very robust. The other thing is they also did a review of kind of our existing policies and looking for some either some gaps or vulnerabilities in our existing policies, which speaks directly to what police commission work should be, which is around policy language. How do we have a really good, robust policies that can follow? And we recently received our reaccreditation through the Oregon and actually Northwest Accreditation Alliance, and found that our policies are actually pretty solid, both within the police department and in the city. Not to say that people don't violate those policies, but they didn't recognize any major gaps in policy.
Two other things from the police commission, and sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, but one is the policy that we were working through. One of them is, and I'm gonna misname and misnumber them. I'm not gonna try on the numbers, but I'm gonna misname them probably, so please correct me if I'm wrong, for any of you who are also there. Working with individuals with, interactions with individuals with mental illness is sort of, I can't remember the policy name, but that's the essence of the policy, and trying to identify, actually it's people with disability, not with mental illness specifically. And so we worked through changes to that policy language, and that it sort of precedes most of my time. It had been worked on by a subcommittee for a number of months, and with police department police department staff and officers. So that was what we voted on most recently in the police commission, and so you can see those policy recommendations and changes. If we could have more information about that here at some point if you want to. And then the second thing, I had a question sort of for the auditor's office from police commission members. If they have a concern about a specific incident and want to check and see if it's on our radar as a case, not that they would be filing, but a case that we might be reviewing as a board, what is the best conduit for them to reach out to the auditor's office, do you think?
Yeah, through the liaison. is
Okay,
fine, yeah.
so I can just sort of, if someone emails me, I can email
Yeah.
email that to you guys or to the chair.
Yeah, we're the most comfortable with.
Okay,
And you wanna know that if they bring up concern, you relay to us, you wanna know that it's something that we've investigated, is that?
they know it's a case that's being investigated, and they want to know if it's something that the board would consider reviewing. As, for community interest, essentially, like, if they were on the board, they would pick it out as one of the closed cases that they would want to see investigated or reviewed. Okay, the other thing that I'll bring up just as a comment, sorry, wow, I'm taking a lot. I'm chair, so I'm gonna take a lot of time, is the budget realities that the city council voted on Monday, which were pretty extensive proposed cuts. And the alternative to proposed cuts is a fee particularly for fire, to sort of account for some of the general fund payments that are currently going to the fire services in Eugene and Springfield. So city council voted for that fee, but I don't think it gets cuts out of the water, and where I sort of saw specific cuts were in downtown policing services and mobile health crisis outreach, and there was stuff that sort of relates to public safety and policing that could still be on the table going forward, even though the fee was voted to move forward by city council. So just, I don't know if that's gonna be a topic that we might learn about if there are budget cuts proposed, but it's something for us to be aware of too, I think. So harsh reality is, like you said. All right, well, all my time contributing to our being late. We have a training topic that was, oh no, we're like perfectly on time almost. And I'm guessing that the trainer is here. Great. Carrie. I'm assuming you're our trainer for the evening. Is that correct?
That is correct. Good evening, everyone. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to see if this will work to share my screen, and if not, we'll go without it. I'm gonna.
If you go to the people, oh, you know this.
I'm not certain I know how to use it.
Yeah, go there. But click on all participants, and then if you right click on her. Yeah, And then say, make a co-host this, or yeah, and then she's co-host now, so you can do anything
You
you want.
should be
Carrie.
good now.
Try not to do more than you need to.
It shows on my side, it's thinking.
Oh, we see it.
Okay, woo, that's a blue screen. So thank you for having me here. I'm not sure, I mean, we could call this a training topic from my understanding. The board was interested in hearing an overview of the police auditor selection process. So that's what I'm here to present on this evening. I just have around 10 slides. These are similar slides that were done in City Council work session earlier in October. So if any of you happen to have seen that, some of this will be repetitive, but I'll go through the presentation. Then of course, at the end, happy to take any specific questions that folks may have about the process in general. And let me just back up one step because I don't think I actually fully introduced myself. My name is Carrie Beraldo. I am currently one of the interim co-directors for the Employee Resource Center. I've been with the city organization around 13, 14 years, do a variety of things now, but originally started out doing recruitments, did that for a long time. And of course, this is a really important position for the city and council in particular. And so I was happy to go back into that, put back on that recruitment hat and support council through that process. So I'm the main recruiter, so to speak, for the process. There we go. So just as a little bit of background in terms of the outreach that was done. So the police auditor position was posted back at the end part of October and was open through January 1st. We utilized a recruitment brochure and we shared it out to a number of professional networks. So those covered law enforcement networks, human resources networks, different things like that, a lot of diversity sites. So we were trying to spread out the recruitment as broad as possible. In addition, I attended the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. So Nicole, I attended that conference and was able to network with a number of experienced oversight professionals. And then council also directed ERC staff to contract with Bob Murray and Associates, which is a large recruiting firm. And we contracted with them to have them assist with outreach efforts. So in addition to the outreach that we had already done, they did additional outreach in terms of advertising it, reaching out to within the oversight industry and referring them to apply for the position. So did quite a bit of outreach, and we're actually very pleased with both the quality and quantity of the candidates that ended up applying. So in terms of a selection process, just what I would ground in is the process that we're using with council for the selection process really aligns with our organizational best practices. So it's a lot of the similar processes that we use for any position at the city. And importantly, they also were really interested in running a process that mirrored the process that was used. I believe it was back in 2008 when interim auditor Gissner was hired into the regular role. So the way the process works is applications are received and the ERC staff did what we call a basic minimum qualification screening. So from that standpoint, we're looking at people's experience to ensure that they meet the minimum qualifications for the position. If they meet the minimum qualifications, they move to what we call the next step of the process. And that would be the application submission screening. What that process is, that was done by council, and that is where council had the opportunity to review individuals' resumes and cover letters, and candidates were asked to submit in their application or cover letter a number of specific questions. They were things like indicate your oversight experience, what you foresee as some of the biggest challenges or barriers to oversight. And so council got that information and were able to screen or rate candidates based on their submission information. And the results of that ultimately determined the candidates that they were wanting to invite to come forward for interviews. The step that would occur after that is interviews. And I will talk about that a little bit in depth. I'm going to go to a couple next slides. And then obviously after interviews, once those are all complete, there would be a background and reference stage. And I will talk about the details of that here in a little bit. I'm going to skip to where we give a little bit more detail. And I apologize, I got ahead of myself and should have forward. So you get to see, I'm going to screen really quick. So interview process. As I said earlier, we received a large quantity and quality of candidates to the point where council made a determination that staff to conduct a first round screening of a select number of candidates. And the that is they wanted to ensure that we were able to further evaluate candidates to determine the most qualified candidates to be invited to come to Eugene for in-person interviews. So those first round screening interviews are taking place this Thursday and Friday. And then after this Friday, we'll then know, council will make a decision after reviewing the results of that, make a decision on the candidates that they then want to invite for an in-person process. Right now, we anticipate the in-person process will take place in March. I am still working with council to identify the exact days for those. I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to break down what goes on with the next panel. So candidates that are invited to be in person would undergo 3 different panel interviews, if that makes sense. So one of them in particular is what I would call a Q&A forum or community panel. You can use those interchangeably. What this would look like is each candidate would be asked to share a brief oral resume on themselves, and then to answer a specific question that would be provided in advance. So it's really their opportunity to just present to a group of community members. And then the remaining time would consist of the candidate taking and answering questions that are submitted in advance by community panel members. So after this week, there'll be an opportunity where I will be reaching out to a number of community members to ask, you know, if they have any suggestions or types of questions or things that they would be really interested in us finding from a candidate, and then we'll draft up interview questions. For this Q&A forum, we'll have a city staff person that would facilitate, so they would ask the question, the candidate would be able to answer, and then the community members are there listening to the answer. And then at the conclusion of each interview, the community members would be asked to complete a written feedback form that would then be shared to council to really inform their decision-making process. On the bottom of this slide, you'll see where we just listed a few of the community panel participants, like who it could include. The council is determining the full list of folks that they would want to invite. And importantly, what they will likely do is they'll identify the community group that they would want to be included. And then what I'll do is I'll reach out to the group and ask for 1 to 2 people that would actually participate and be a part of the panel. I think a lot of this will be based on the exact dates. And so you'll see Citizen Review Board is listed there. And so that is really one of the main opportunities where you all would likely be able to participate, is having a couple folks that would actually sit on that panel. And then of course, being able to submit if there are specific questions that you would want to make sure that we're covering in that forum. The next interview that they would do, so these candidates will have a series of interviews, but the next interview that they would do was what we would call an internal stakeholder interview. And so that is where each candidate participates in really what you would picture as a structured interview process, where there's a panel of folks that are interviewing, a series of questions that are asked. All the same questions are asked of every candidate. And then usually there's an opportunity at the end where the candidate can ask the stakeholder specific questions as well. And so again, similar to the last slide, you'll see at the bottom of this slide, those are potential stakeholders that council may select to include as part of that stakeholder panel. And it would follow the same suit in terms of they would do their interview, and then at the end of it, they would submit a feedback form that we would compile and provide to council to help inform their decision. Looking at doing is likely having this be a 2-day event for candidates. So they would do those first two things, the community panel or Q&A, the stakeholder interview, and then the next day they would have their mayor and council interview. I did include mayor on this slide. I'm assuming mayor would sit in on it. The mayor is not necessarily a decider. This position does report to city council. So that is up to her. I'm not sure for sure if she will sit in that or not. But this again would be a structured interview process with the full council. They would use predetermined questions. I've been soliciting feedback from a variety of different sources to help develop questions. And then of course, council would approve the questions that are asked. And then, like I said, council would be provided with the feedback from the other panels to help inform their decision-making. And then one thing that is still tentative is we often, when we have these bigger processes, and especially when we're considering folks that might be relocating to this area, we'll often arrange for them to do a tour of, when I say the city of Eugene, the actual city community. It's not really a rated activity. It's not where somebody gets scored, but it's really given as a courtesy to just help inform and give somebody a nice taste of our wonderful community. So that is an optional activity. I'm not 100% sure if council will land there, and it may be a factor, may be a deciding factor depending on the candidates that are invited to move forward. And then I think that is it. I mentioned earlier the background and reference stage. That is a very comprehensive background. We would actually have the candidate, it's what we call a police background. So it is where we would utilize an investigator that would do very detailed, thorough references, and they end up writing a formal report that would be given to council to help inform their decision. And of course, that would take place obviously after all of the interviews and once they have decided on a candidate. I'm gonna see if I could stop sharing. There we go. That was very quick and high level, I realize. So questions about the process or what it could look like in terms of the involvement from the CRB?
Thank you, Gary. Any questions from board members? I have some. I wanted to know, Carrie, if for that community panel, is your understanding of it that you would be forming a group that would review each of the candidates? So it'd be a consistent panel that would be in each interview for each of the candidates? Or is there one final candidate that they would be interviewing?
No, it is our goal. It is likely that we will identify a number of candidates that would move forward to what we're calling the in-person process. And that in-person process would then be the community panel, the stakeholder panel, and the council. So if we had 4 candidates, all 4 of those candidates would have that same experience.
Those would be
I think that's what you're
separate.
asking.
Yeah, and those would be separate 2-day periods.
Correct.
Like, yeah. I guess like my question about that is really how, I think you're probably thinking about this too, how you get a community group to be able to commit to that level of engagement and get it to be representative of community members too. So I don't know if that's something that you can briefly talk about, or if it's, yeah, if we'll hear more about that or something. Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, I think some of the challenges is identifying dates. And it sounds so basic, right? Everybody is super busy doing a number of things. And so identifying candidates, we will likely spread a very broad net of community groups, but I know that there are ones that are really important to have represented. And so we have folks that do really well at doing community engagement within the city. And so I'll likely be partnering with them and seeing, you know, if there aren't certain groups that are represented, are there others that they would recommend? You know, could we go to a different group that could maybe speak on their behalf? So we may have to be creative in how we do that. I do know the last process, when I looked at it, I think we had around 20 to 22 folks that participated on the community panel in particular. And so for me, that was very promising. That's a very good showing of community members to be able to come in and hear from candidates. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that we see that as well. But I do know I'm hoping to get dates solidified by next week, because I think that will be important to get in people's on people's calendars here soon.
Okay, thanks.
What kind of a process will you use to select these people? Excuse me, will the groups use to select the candidates? Will it be a vote, or how will you do that? Consensus?
You're asking for the candidates, how to select the candidates?
Yes, well, when the groups are being involved, which ones are they gonna vote on that, these people, or what are they gonna do?
No, so for the focus on the community panel. So on the community panel, the panel would be listening to the candidates answer questions. And at the end of that individual, so that candidate's time, each of the community members would then submit feedback. So we'll all have a series of questions where I'm asking for feedback. You would submit that feedback and I would provide that to council. So council is the decision maker in the process. This allows for them to hear from community panel members, but they would just be giving feedback, and then that goes to council. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does, thank you.
Okay.
I guess I have one more other question. So this is pertaining to the experience that I've had at the university when we're looking for faculty to move to Eugene, and we get candidates from for kind of high profile positions from around the country, from other countries, and they're interested in the job and the idea of working at this university. But then we also have had challenges sometimes with people from other places not immediately understanding or like feeling connected to the community. And that has largely been for candidates of color. And so I'm wondering if there are ways that you all think about that, like how to support candidates who might not see themselves immediately when they arrive here, like on a tour of Eugene, for example, and how you like cater to people coming from different cultures, different communities that might look different than we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke to one of the pieces. I think the tour of the city is that as an optional activity. My hope is that we're able to group folks with someone that identifies similar to them. In addition, the contract with Bob Murray and Associates, so I mentioned that earlier, they are a recruiting firm. I did ask that they were specific when they were reaching out to candidates to really have a good open conversation about the city, the demographics, what that looks like. And so my hope is that a good portion of the candidates at least had full awareness of that. But it is something for me to just think about how just to be aware of, and if there's maybe some potential touch points that I can help with leading up to an invite and an actual on-site at the city. I know it can be, I think it can be challenging. Sometimes folks will go through the process, and then when they're actually thinking about making a decision and moving their whole family, sometimes I think that's where you're talking about. Sometimes we see folks are like, maybe this isn't the right move. And so anything that we can do to try and just have folks think about that and be able to ask questions in advance. I'm happy to take other suggestions or recommendations, but it's definitely on my mind and has been a point of some of the conversations I've had so far.
Great. Any other questions?
I think you covered a lot of it, but I guess I'm curious when we might expect to have an auditor, like when the background investigation is going to be complete.
Yeah, so depending on when we do this process or the in-person interviews in March, it's right around the middle of March is when we're looking at potential dates. If council is able to decide on a candidate that they want to then move forward to backgrounds and references, typically that level of background, I would say takes between 3 to 4 weeks. And it really depends on the candidate. It depends on how many places a candidate has worked before. You know, if they have a really robust history and lots of places, we're often asking the investigator to research all of those. If they've worked at one agency for, 15 years, it can be a little bit shorter, but I would estimate around 3 to 4 weeks. So it's likely, we're into April for sure. Best case scenario if everything kind of lines up.
Thank you.
And we did see that the interim auditor has been approved for an extension, so that's great. For
Yeah.
at least to cover some of the gap.
Correct.
April 25th.
To May 5th,
April 25th.
April 25th, that's right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie.
You're welcome.
In the process.
Yep. And then just to recap. So again, I'll work with probably through Lindsay or others in the auditor's office to do outreach likely next week. Once we have those dates solidified.
Okay, great, and we'll probably be hearing from you in some form or fashion to participate in some of these panels.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Good night.
Okay. Okay, are we ready for Rob to take it away for case review? Does anybody need a break before we do that? Excellent.
All right, sounds like let's roll. All right, so we've got our case review. So we've got allegations. Allegations regarding truthfulness, search and seizure, and report and evidence submission. So the summary of the facts. So on July 15, 2023, at approximately 1:49 a.m., Eugene Police Department officers responded to the report of a burglary in the city of Eugene. The police response stemmed from calls for service by two individuals. The first individual reported an unidentified person who we'll refer to as a suspect. Unidentified person tried to kick in their apartment door. The second individual reported a disruptive person and added that he or she was known to possess firearms. Several officers responded to the service request and began their search for the suspect. Officer F located the suspect and his or her partner, which we'll refer to as the victim, in an enclosed area side yard. After the suspect and the victim were detained by the officers, a bag was located in the enclosed area side yard. Officers decided to move the bag from the location it was discovered to the area of the marked patrol unit vehicles. So Officer C carried the bag from the enclosed area side yard. The victim asserted ownership of the bag. Officer C requested consent to search the bag. The victim denied the request. Officer C transferred custody of the bag to Officer D. Officer C told Supervisor A he or she was going to obtain a search warrant for the bag. After handling the bag, Officer D set it on the ground. Officer D then utilized a flashlight, looked inside the bag, and observed a firearm. When the case was reviewed by the Lane County District Attorney's Office, concerns were raised regarding the firearm discovery. So in Officer C's internal affairs interview, he or she explained the events during the incident. And in Officer D's interview, he or she stated that he or she did not perceive missteps at the time of the incident and stated that he or she did not review Officer E's search warrant prior to the interview. Until prior to the interview. So then we have 3 allegations for Officer D. So we have a truthfulness allegation that Officer D failed to be honest and truthful related to his or her discovery of a gun in a bag, including but not limited to providing information in a manner that was evasive, deceptive, or misleading when he or she described in his or her report what he or she could feel in the bag without including that he or she manipulated the bag in order to feel its contents. falsely stating in his or her report that he or she observed the gun in the bag in plain view when he or she tugged at the opening of the bag to be able to see its contents. Falsely stating to other officers on scene that he or she had not manipulated the bag. Falsely stating to other officers on scene that he or she had not opened the bag. And finally, providing information in a manner that was evasive, deceptive, or misleading when he or she spoke to the DDA about the circumstances surrounding his or her discovery of gun in the bag. That was the first allegation. There's two additional for Officer D. So the second one, search and seizure. That Officer D conducted an unconstitutional search of the bag without a warrant or a valid exception to the warrant requirement when he or she manipulated the bag to feel its contents, and or when he or she placed the bag on the ground and tugged on the partially open zipper to provide a clear view inside the bag. And the third and final allegation for Officer D, search and seizure, that Officer D attempted to coerce consent from the victim to search the bag, insinuating he or she could be convicted of a felony if he or she continued to assert his or her constitutional right to refuse consent to search his or her bag. And then we have one allegation for Officer C, and that is report and evidence submission that Officer C failed to submit a true and accurate and complete report of the incident when he or she omitted from his or her report that Officer D manipulated the bag while it was in his or her, Officer D's, hands, and or when he or she, Officer D, placed the bag on the ground. Then we come to our adjudication recommendations. So for the three for Officer D, auditor recommended sustained for 1 and 2, insufficient evidence for 3, chain of command, and the chief agreed with insufficient evidence for the first one, sustained for the second, and unfounded for the third. And then for Officer C, for report and evidence submission, auditor recommended insufficient evidence, chain of command, and the chief recommended went with unfounded. And then these are our normal discussions, so I won't bore you with reading all those since we've covered them. And then these are the materials that we've provided. And then I will say thank you and close it out.
Can you go back 2 slides just so I can make sure I get this right, since I have to say these?
Jude, is this one easier?
Yeah.
Or do you want? Okay,
That's great.
and I can bring this back up for you guys.
Totally. Okay, thank you, Rob.
Wait, can you go back to slide 2?
So all the way back to 2.
Yeah, it's because my brain is 1 or 3. Excuse me.
And I'm gonna stop sharing, but at any time I can bring it up for anyone in the room.
Okay, great. So we'll first, I'm forgetting, do we have a general round of general comments before
Sometimes
we,
we do.
yeah, how do you feel about, do we need to have a round of general comments before we go through the formal things that we comment on? We generally just talk about things through all of the categories, so I'm feeling that we should just start with complaint intake and classification, and if you want to start first, you don't, okay, well, Brittany, do you feel comfortable starting first?
I can.
Okay, great. So complaint intake and classification.
I will say I don't often know what to say under this one, but I think it was interesting to me. Did I understand correctly that the DA generated this or had a role
I have a
in
question.
that? Good question. Yeah, so that was interesting to me, and maybe you'll have better questions than me on that. And then I don't know if this is where I should ask this question, but was I understanding correctly? Because there was reference to a July 3rd incident with a gun battle, in quotes, and that the question around how this evidence was handled could have or did compromise connecting the two events. If I'm asking that correctly, do we know the answer to that? I just wanted to try to understand better. I don't know who to ask.
I'm getting ready to
Anyone?
go into my favorite sergeant.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it did.
That it did compromise the ability to link them.
I believe so.
Okay, so understanding significance. I just only had that comment in question.
Great.
Thank you.
Rick?
Well, thank you. I think the complaint is fine. You have DA saying, do something about this, and so you investigate it, and I think that's fine to do that. But, you know, you gotta do what the DA says.
That's it. You're done with that
I'm
category,
done.
Rick? Okay, great.
Okay.
For that, I just have questions around confusion that I had in reading the process that led to the DA essentially initiating the complaint. So was it first an email from a sergeant that identified a problematic situation? And I'm sorry, this is probably a long time for any of you who worked on the investigation, but a long time ago, and this might be too detailed, but I was trying to track like how that complaint arose in the DA's office's mind, because there was a member of the DA's office who helped with the warrant, but that was sort of separate. And then there was an email chain that sort of led to the complaint, I thought. And the email chain actually started in the police department with identifying a problem that might compromise a case. Is that true?
If I remember right, I believe it was one of our detectives who was investigating both cases. That brought it to the DA's attention.
Right.
As they're
Okay.
going through it, they see this incident that looked potentially problematic.
Yeah.
So it was brought to the DA's attention, or the DDA, I guess.
Yeah, the
Who then
DDA.
brought it to the DA,
Yeah.
who brought it to us.
And the DA effectively made the complaint, sort of.
Correct.
So I guess my question is. That's great, that's fine, that's the outcome. The outcome is good, that there was an investigation, and now we're looking at all the facts. It seemed like the detective, if you're saying it was the detective who sort of started that chain of conversation, also could have had agency to like ask for the auditor's office or for internal affairs to look into it. And I'm just curious about that. Like they said in their email, you know, I don't really want to get anybody in trouble. I don't think that this is worth getting someone, or I don't know that I'm not using the right words, but that detective didn't want to make a huge deal about it, but knew that it was an opportunity for training and that it might compromise a case. And so I wonder about the mechanism that they know is also available to investigate it, or if that's not something they wanted to do, and sort of the implications of that. I don't know if there's any answers that anyone can provide to that, but
I would say not, not being able to be in a detective's head.
yeah.
I think there's kind of two different pieces to this. Search and seizures, I mean, changes all the time.
Hmm.
So do cases get lost because of a search that's potentially problematic? Yes. Is that necessarily something that's against our policy? Not necessarily. So I think that's what he was weighing. Do we have a policy violation here that needs to be investigated by internal affairs?
Mhm.
Or do we have a discussion that looks like it was problematic in this person's understanding of whether or not that search was legal?
Yeah.
If this makes sense, what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I think that's what it came down to. I don't think the detective, necessarily was going into whether or not there was deception or anything like that.
Mhm.
It was more just the way the search went down overall was potentially problematic.
Mhm. Interesting. Well, I found that whole chain of emails really interesting, that there was this, you know, alert internally that led to this DA acknowledgement of the fact that this was probably an issue. So they asked for the complaint to be filed. It all worked, you know, I think the intake of that and the classification of, I think they were really robust classifications, looking at sort of any aspect that could be a policy violation. And so whether that's the right approach or not, I just want to observe that. And I think that's the end of my comments.
I think with respect to the complaint or the intake, appreciated how that worked out. I also noticed that perhaps there was an opportunity for someone other than the DA to make a report to the auditor, but either way, it was investigated, which I think is good. I thought the investigation and the monitoring was good. And like you said, the classification was robust.
I think we covered. You're kind of fair on the. I mean, I think differently, I'm not sure that the DA, I think it was appropriate the DA did, I don't think. The DA should have been someone to do, I think someone else should have brought this, if they had to. I think that was a misstep within the department to let it go, to them having to bring this up.
Great. So the next category of commentary is on policies, practices, and training. Rick, would you care to kick us off?
Policies, practices, or training, I think that there are two things that are at issue here. One is telling the truth about what you did. The other is making sure that the DA is happy with your work that you do so that they can get a conviction. Strikes me that what happened here is the DA didn't like the evidence that they had in front of them because there was some possibility of some sharp defense lawyer getting the thing thrown out. And the DA didn't want to take the blame for losing the case, so he wanted to blame the cops. And so he laid the groundwork for the DA, the deputy district DA laid the groundwork for trying to leave this on the face of the cops rather than for the DA losing the case. And it's a matter of education, it seems to me, that you need to make sure that people understand that when you have a situation like this, you should leave it be as much as you can, get it over. If you know that it's heavy enough to have a gun in it, you think the guy had a gun, you have evidence to establish the guy had a gun, get a search warrant and put it someplace where it can be, no one can wrestle with it, get a search warrant, search it and find the gun. What you have is a tendency for officers to be tempted to squeeze the package to determine whether or not something's there, so they can have justification for making the search or finding the gun. They want to get the gun off the street. That's natural. That's a natural reaction for any human being to make. Get the gun off the street. Let's get this gun out of circulation because we don't want these guys, these hoodlums running around with these guns. And so, you have a situation where if the guy knew that there was a gun in there, he probably could have said, well, let's just set it aside and get a search warrant. Well, you know the gun's gonna be there, so you know it's gonna be there, so it's eventually just a matter of timing on the search warrant to get the search warrant. So put pressure on the police officers to get the convictions, and the police officers are doing what they can, and you get a guy out there in the street, there's been shots fired and other things going on, and it's a situation where guy wants to get the gun off the street, so that's what he did. I don't blame him for doing it. On the other hand, it's probably better for him to just leave it there and get it won. Sure that one of these local district judges would give, or local municipal judges give a warrant and blink an eye with that. But that's all.
Yeah, I appreciate your insight from the work that you've done. I think the warrant was, whatever you say in that world, enacted. The warrant did come
Assigned.
through, assigned?
It
Oh,
was
yeah.
signed.
What is it?
Signed.
Signed. The warrant was signed in short time, and they eventually were able to sort of search the bag and find the evidence. I guess what I found most fascinating was watching the body worn video and also reading the transcriptions of those and the conversation that happened amongst officers and sergeants there on scene, and the sort of weighing of how to move through that situation. And so it led me to question how, and as you mentioned, Sergeant Peckles, there are changes to policy related to search and seizure all the time. Is that what you said, search and seizure all the time? So I guess I wonder if someone can describe how nebulous that feels as an officer in the field, or whether it is very clear cut all the time to know when you're going to compromise. And that, to me, the biggest issue is just compromising the ability to take the next step in this situation, which is a conviction on something. So like, can we have any kind of commentary on like the nebulous nature of search and seizure rules and how that's hard to train to or hard to define in the field, or if it's very clear cut?
No, it's,
No.
Okay,
it's very, it's all dependent on the situation
Yeah.
and the circumstances. What witnesses had seen prior to who had the bag when you got there, the position in the bag when you found it. And that all plays a role. Who's going to jail? Who has probable cause charges to go to jail? So we have searches into arrest. We have our inventory policy, which allows us to get into bags. Potentially. Again, the word potentially,
Mhm.
it's all circumstantial, or it's all based on the circumstances of like that actual incident.
mhm,
Which is why, kind of going back to my initial comment, just picking up that bag from the ground was potentially problematic.
Mm.
But if their intent is just to pick it up and secure it in a car, and then in the court, it's deemed that was problematic, is that necessarily something that they should be held through an internal affairs investigation? Because there was a case law that says that that was wrong.
mhm.
I-
And is it driven primarily by case law?
100%
Yes.
on my case law. Yeah.
And so,
So
how
here would be my commentary about where you're at in this moment, talking about search and seizure.
Yeah.
Specifically, notwithstanding the truthfulness piece, because we're always gonna look into a complaint of veracity of our officers. But the search and seizure piece is that it's 100% dictated by Fourth Amendment search and seizure. And search and seizure is different throughout the country based on your Court of Appeals cases that determine the rules. So we have Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the West Coast. Though it can look very different in the Ninth Circuit compared to like where Mark's from in Cincinnati, which is what, Fourth Circuit or something like that? Sixth Circuit, could be very different. So it's always changing depending on where you are. New case laws coming and going, it's shaping the way we do things, both in like search and seizure and use of force, quite honestly, which you hear a lot of use of force cases here too. When it comes to that. And the other thing I would say is that the incident around search and seizure and whether it's a good or bad search is one of the few things that we actually have a mechanism in court to determine whether it is or isn't.
Mm.
And whether it is or isn't, I don't believe should reside in an administrative investigation within a police department, whether it's a good search or not. They have actually motions to suppress that would actually substantiate with people that understand the rule of law and a magistrate that understands the case law and be able to say, was it a good search or not a good search, to be able to do that. So to Sergeant Peckle's point, it's a bit of a slippery slope because we could not have a case before us at all right now. If we get a motion to suppress where one of our court cases suggests that somebody engaged in a bad search from 6 months ago, is that to suggest that we should unwind 6 months and now investigate that officer for a bad search? And I would suggest that the answer is no to that.
Mhm.
So in this particular nuance of this case is really interesting around the search and seizure. Now, ultimately, we sustained that it was a bad search. But that largely was predicated by the fact that we had an allegation come forward that it was a bad search. And so it's just an interesting nuance about talking about search and seizure, how quickly it changes, how much it is anchored to perception at the time, what the officer sees, feels, hears, what, especially for closed containers, what they can immediately identify as being inside of them, whether there's a safety component to it, whether there's exigent circumstances, it goes on and on and on. And the bottom line is we're not coming to get it right.
Yeah.
We're not gonna always get it right.
So how do you capture that in policy? And I'm sorry, I did not look up the policy violations for search and seizure, or the policy language.
Yeah.
Is it captured in sort of a general way of police officers must track case law and?
Well, can I answer that a little bit, Clay? Sorry, this is Lindsay.
That was surprising.
Sorry.
Hi, Lindsay.
I sound really bad because I haven't been well, but I would say in this particular kind of case, so I wish we had a lawyer to explain this to you better because I am not a lawyer. The way I kind of am thinking about this in general is that the big deal things for a lot of civilians is that police can take your life and liberty, right? Those are the big deal things. Constitutional rights and uses of force are the big deal things. This falls into the bucket of your constitutional rights. So, while I do think that there are absolutely downstream mechanisms for coping with the incidental, accidental, unintentional, inevitable human error that will occur when making good faith efforts to enforce the law, right? That will happen. And we have judicial processes downstream. I do think that there are episodically, intermittently, occasionally times when it does make sense to also examine them in an administrative setting. So I wouldn't say that because we have one, it precludes the usefulness of the other, particularly because we do have a system here for looking at it, right? This is not a system that exists everywhere. So certainly I'm glad we have judicial processes that safeguard us if we are, the accused in these kinds of circumstances. But in terms of broader community trust, I think it's really important that in a place like this, where we have an administrative process, that looking at things like a potential constitutional violation is part of the work that we do. So in terms of policy, you've got to uphold people's constitutional rights, right? That's one of the core foundational things that we do. So I don't think of it as a super minute specific thing necessarily just related to search and seizure, which is incredibly complicated, incredibly situational, always in flux. Like they used to send me home with the annual update to Oregon search and seizure. It is a tome. I do not understand most of it. It is very complex, and officers do have to go out there and try to enact that. And I sympathize with the complexity of that. And I still think it's worth a closer look, particularly in a case like this, where we have something that's occurred that maybe means a judicial process can't even happen, right? So I think it's kind of both and. As with the search and seizure, I think it's complicated. But I hope that kind of answers your question about how we were thinking about the policy part of it.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Well, and I would just say that I don't disagree with Lindsay, but I would emphasize something that she started her commentary with is, I wish I had a lawyer here to explain this. Anytime you're starting a sentence with, we had real specific legal expertise to help us understand something, I think it's a vulnerability of policy, because we're not all lawyers. We don't live in this world.
No lawyers can be right each time.
Yeah, so it's so it's a difficult one to kind of wrap your head around.
Yeah. Well, and in this section of policies, practices, and training, I think the hard part for us is to understand, seems like many officers on scene had varying approaches to how this should be handled. I sort of understood body language and some words that were almost audible of I wouldn't do it that way, from one of the people who was capturing body worn video. And yet, also trying to support that this is an important moment to be trying to do the right thing, and a variety of paths are possible. So in terms of training, it's sort of, it's hard to make commentary on that from a community standpoint when it seems to be really difficult. But it did seem like there was sort of a variation amongst approaches and conversation about that, which I thought was great, to have conversation between officers on scene about what we should be doing, and asking questions about, did you open the bag? Did you not open the bag? Did you manipulate the bag? No one asked that on scene, but it seemed like that was the question that was on people's minds. So there is an understanding that you want to protect the integrity of the case at hand. And I guess I'm having a harder time with the truthfulness allegation, and sort of understanding how we think about that in this category. And with the diverging outcomes from the auditor and from the chief and chain of command. So I don't know how to wrap that into this section of the commentary, so I won't do it. Okay, that's it.
So I think some of the training could come in, or some of the training could be on the search and seizure case law. I don't know if it has to be yearly. I don't expect officers to follow things daily. I also think there could be some training about like the role of peers when we might be noticing something that we wouldn't do and just encouraging everybody to act the right way, act the way that you would. I think the truthfulness piece is hard. It's hard to train somebody to tell the truth. The person has to buy in. So I'm not sure that there's much training around that. I assume the policy is fine. I assume that the policy is sufficient with respect to constitutional rights violations, and I know it's sufficient for truthfulness, so that'll be it.
Much commentary. Okay, we're good. I think policy should, I would hope is fine, wants to stay on with constitutional requirements. As far as practices and the training, I am not the most up to date on Oregon specifically in regards to search and seizures. They train more for federal things, but there are questions in the police officers' commentary where they didn't seem sure what they were allowed to do, like what a search incident to arrest was. How would we define plain view? And it makes me, as a citizen, concerned that if they don't know what they can do, why are we allowing them to do that? And then they go on further and they have a police legal advisor that they can call to ask questions to, but they don't ask counsel first before they enact these questionable actions. And we take something like this search where the officer, I remember, handed them the bag, but stated that they believe they should get a warrant first, and the police just put it in the car and hold, but another officer blatantly ignores what one told them when handed it in. Mayhaps manipulate to search the bag. I think it just that level of disconnect of cohesion with officers on the scene is also concerning. And maybe that's just because I'm not a police officer. I'm not sure how the chain of command was working here. But handing someone back saying, I think we need a search warrant, and then someone saying, I think not, and manipulating instead of just getting a search warrant, which would be easy, as Rick said earlier, clear, and they called the PLA who told them they should probably do this, X, and Y. It seems, from my perspective, very clear cut, and it makes me worried that the training for the officers is not adequate enough for them to be executing the laws. I think that's mostly for that. As far as truthfulness, perhaps their perception of what the truth was false because of a lack of understanding. So I don't feel strong one way or the other on that exactly, but at the same time, there's video footage of what actually occurred. So I think they should be truthful with saying exactly what occurred, since it can be fact checked. I think that's clear.
I found myself feeling really appreciative for body worn footage in this case, because I read it first and was so confused, and then it was really helpful. So I just have to give a shout out for appreciating the fact that we have that technology in place now. I had noticed in that detective email that we were referencing before that there was a comment that fondling evidence is, quote, not recommended, and then another comment about this being flagged as a potential training issue. So I was just curious if that generated anything, or if a detective's email has any weight, if a detective recommends like this might be cause for training. Is anything done with that, or was anything done? Do you remember?
I can't say we had any specific training based off of that incident. But we have, I would say, yearly training for search, search and seizure laws and any updates to that. As you heard in the body cam, one officer talks about how they had a case, where just the padding of the outer portion of the pocket became a search. And I mean, even that was new to me watching that video. So again, it comes back to it's ever changing. I mean, next month we could have something completely different, a brand new incident that generates brand new case law that changes something in one direction or another. And it can go back in the opposite direction based on what that case law could be.
Yeah, thank you. I was mostly just thinking, if someone internally says, hey, there might be a training need here, what happens? You know, if somebody flags that, and it depends on who it is, and yeah.
Again, nothing specific from that specific incident came out. I think I would say generally, the squeezing of the bag is probably more of a general understanding that that's probably not appropriate. But again, the touching of a pocket, I mean, this is how specific it
Yeah.
starts getting.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I'll share that that's changed from when I was in operations. I mean, there was a time where you could manipulate a bag, and if the contents immediately revealed itself to be something like a weapon, then it got you into the bag. I mean, that,
Yeah.
so, you know, if I was out on this, God help us, if I was out on the street doing real police work, understand that even my perception of what's, I mean, and you would think your chief would know what he's doing, but he's actually pretty good at some things and not very good at others. And that's one of them, because it has changed so much. And so that is all to say that, when it comes to doing this, as much training as we give and as much updates, and we do a lot of, with our city attorney, Ben Miller, we do a lot of legal law updates that, really, when you get good at it, it is from our most experienced officers that have done this a lot, that have been put in a variety of situations and get really good at it. And in this particular case, you had a blending of some really, really young officers, some maybe more experienced officers, and I think that's why you see kind of the back and forth.
And I'm curious, it's just a thought, because I believe it was a longer term officer that actually handled the evidence, and maybe that's from being being there longer was a detriment, because that officer had seen the law change so many times.
Maybe.
And, you know,
One of the other officers I can tell you that's involved in this was recently off FTEP. You know, this is a 2023 case, and we hired him in 2022, and so I think he just remember reading, saying that he was maybe recently off FTEP, so he's a younger officer, which is the benefit of having him. He just gone through the academy, getting the most recent updates. And I'm not saying that's a contributing factor, that's a nuance that we see in our police department because of how many young officers we have versus tenured officers. It's not always the tenured officers that are actually as up to speed as they should be. Some of our younger officers are actually pretty bright because they have the most contemporary information.
If I may also sort of segue to his comment, it's very rare that something like this is brought forward for all the thousands of tens of thousands of contacts that they have in the course of, I guess, the 2 years since this happened. I remember a case from 2020 on a fanny pack. I know Cindy remembers. So all things considered, it's pretty rare. On this one, I'm not going to comment on whether I would have classified or anything because I wasn't here. But we still have to have something in place. For example, if someone just decides they're going to kick a door in without a warrant or any exigent circumstances, that we have that tool available to us. But I will say again, it's extraordinarily rare. And as you said, with the body worn videos, it's all very easy. They'll almost inevitably err on the side of caution. And the way the drug laws are in Oregon now, they don't even want to be bothered with, you know, all that would be required on the drugs. All things considered, I must say, I think they're very well trained in this area. But if your instinct tells you there's a gun there, it's probably pretty hard to turn away from that. So, but I just wanted to clarify for, you know, we're just not throwing all kinds of administrative investigations on search and seizure out there. Very rare.
One last thing I just wanted to speak to that I don't know that I've heard tonight yet is talking about the engagement with the victim and the mention of apparent or assumed domestic violence. And I'm not calling this out necessarily as a training recommendation. I just think it was interesting to listen to and observe the officer because of the allegation around coercing consent. which we can talk more on the adjudication recommendations, but I just want to, I appreciated what I heard the officers seeming to want to help the victim make an informed decision and call out. It seemed that there was concern about the victim's well-being, and I just saw some humanness in the officer and in the interaction with the victim. And I think that got really complicated because of the potential risk of coercion and how that factors in. But I just think that that was a really interesting factor into how this played out, and to some of the nuance of the officers' goals in preserving safety and trying to do what's right, kind of many layers of the situation. It wasn't just about confirming this is a gun, but what's the outcome for all the players involved.
That's great. Adjudication is the last round, and I meant to start it. I want to come back just briefly to training and sort of ask a question, which is that there were, as has been mentioned, sort of senior and younger officers on scene, and maybe I've totally forgotten where I was going to go with this. I really had an important point to make. I know it. I think it's lost now, so maybe I'll come back to it. But something about training and making sure that they all are trained. That's not accurate. Okay, for the adjudication, would you mind bringing up the adjudication slide? So we'll do 2 rounds for this, one just commentary about the adjudications, and then one where we actually do the voting, just to know, because I think we need to know specifics about what how each person feels in each category of allegation. I really struggled with truthfulness on this because it's a really serious allegation, and the way that the interview with the officer D went, I sort of understood, and the observations in body worn video, I understood their intentions, and they were, to ensure public safety and to assist with the situation that was happening. And I think all of the intentionality was there. I really have a hard time understanding how that officer pretty openly manipulated, well, I won't use that term because that's a very specific term, but felt around the bag to understand what was inside, and then did not mention that in their report, and did not really own up to that being a problematic aspect, which I think others viewed as what would be termed manipulation of the bag, which is something that compromises that evidence. So I have questions about the rest of it, and it was dark, and I think the bag on the ground, zipper opening in the dark, I think that all of that is happenstance and could be forgotten after the fact, that very minor movements of the officer could have changed how the bag opened. All of that is just such nuance, and I don't think that they were being untruthful about that, but I have a hard time understanding their approach to communicating about the fondling of the bag. That's the word I keep not wanting to use, but
So what they use.
yeah, that's what they use. It's the official word. So insufficient evidence, I think, is where I have landed in my heart, but I don't know if I don't know who wrote the memo. Lindsay
It
did.
was me.
I don't know if you could give us some insight into your process for landing on a sustained allegation of truthfulness for that.
Sure. So just to be clear, my instructions were that it's sustained at 51% or 50.01%. Do I think more likely than not that it happened? I'm not going for beyond a reasonable doubt, just to be clear. So I think the threshold is important, because this is one of those cases where I think we are approaching an absolute dead heat 50-50 kind of type situation. So just to be clear, I did not think this was a slam dunk. I also have to like acknowledge my personal training is in qualitative research and textual analysis, right? So that's my training. And in my training, I am looking both for what is said and what is omitted, right? Omissions are also part of what I'm looking at. And so that was weighed a lot on me as I watch video and watch the scene unfold in the moment. Why the omission of those two specific things over and over when the other surrounding details are reified over and over again and spoken over and over again? That's concerning to me. I think I made other arguments like that were specific in the memo. There's multiple justifications given for the same action, which don't match up over time. A lot of other things that, to me, in the balance, which ultimately is subjective, I could get to 50.01%. That, to me, it seemed to be misleading, withholding of material facts that were significant to the case, and therefore untruthful. That was my rationale. It was not simple. I think there is plenty of room for fair-minded people to completely disagree with my analysis, but that was sort of where my analysis came from, if that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. All right, that's all I want to say in general.
I think it would also be helpful if you could briefly talk about the sustained allegation of the search and seizure, the second for Officer D. The first search and seizure allegation.
I'm so sorry. I'm totally lost because I can't see what you're saying. So can you help me understand what you want me to comment on?
I'll share my screen with you. I think you were just asking me to bring it up, right?
Sure, thank
Okay,
you.
making sure I wasn't missing the caption on it.
It's the unconstitutional search of a bag, search and seizure.
Okay,
And everyone in chain of command, and then also, the auditor's office determined that that was sustained. Is that the one you're asking about?
It might not be. Let me see. I just want
so
to
sorry.
understand.
There's too many players and too much time.
Can you go to the list of adjudications? 2 slides down, I think.
There. Next one.
That's for Officer City.
Yeah.
See.
Okay, never mind.
Are we okay?
No, yeah, I'm still interested, I guess, and from the chief as well, because we've talked about how perhaps it's not an administrative or something that we shouldn't be investigating administratively. So I'm curious how we got to the.
So sorry, just to be really clear. So were you concerned? So the first search and seizure, everyone agreed, right? That was easy. Are you talking about this second one, the attempt to coerce consent from the victim to search the bag? Is that the one that you're asking about?
No, the first one that you mentioned.
Oh, okay. And the one, my understanding is that everybody agreed on the first one.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how can I help? What did you want me to comment on?
Just how we got to an actual sustained allegation for the search and seizure. What do we?
Well, to use everybody's favorite word, to fondle the bag was deemed to be the part that shouldn't have happened, that the warrant should have been acquired to search the bag, that the fondling of the bag constituted a search. That was my understanding. Does that make sense?
And that clearly occurred and everybody agreed that that occurred. And so it was a violation of that policy. Is that
correct?
And I think if I can offer just, I mean, having the benefit of having me here, I'm gonna give you some thoughts. So as it pertains to the search piece of this, I mean, we enjoyed the benefit of hindsight bias and being able to take an extraordinary amount of time to dig into the details of this particular case and whether or not this was what we believe to be a good search or not. We felt like it was a bad search. that's a completely different environment than out on the scene in the moment with what you know, trying to make a good decision about whether or not it's a good or bad search. And so that's how we got to that. You know, if you look at that policy, really what we're saying is, was it a good search or not? Not did you intentionally violate somebody's constitutional rights? It doesn't ever talk anything about any around the intentionality of trying to do that. To Mark's point earlier, there are some no-brainer things that officers have engaged in, hopefully not in the city, but we've seen nationwide, that are obvious violations of people's constitutional rights, and there may be some motivations around that seem to be of ill will. And in this particular case, we didn't, I don't think saw any like intentionality or ill will as a result of intentionally violating constitutional rights, but upon further inspection, the actual search itself ended up being a bad search, and that's why it became sustained. Lindsay, you had a chance to chat or talk a little bit about the one allegation that we don't agree on, where it's insufficient evidence. This is a conflict we're going to constantly have, around a truthfulness policy that I think is overly broad, and that has a lot of components in it that, for lack of anywhere else, the auditor's office only has truthfulness to be able to land on. Where in fact, I think if we looked at some amendment to that, we might actually find something that better fits. And secondly, the burden of proof around truthfulness for me is different than it is for the auditor's office. Because a sustained allegation of truthfulness means you are fired from your job. Likely. It is a life-changing and life and career altering event for a police officer to have a sustained allegation of truthfulness. And so my burden of proof is a little bit higher than 50.01%. So that's really the only difference you see in this, unlike maybe others where I just totally disagree with how you got to your opinion. For me, this is more around whether or not it was proven that this was that there was enough information to suggest to me that there was an intentionality and a willfulness around the veracity of the officer to get me to a place where I would be okay with knowing that a sustained allegation would mean probably separation from employment for that officer at the very most, at the very least, which is still really, really hard, a Brady allegation, which means that the officer is rendered incapable of testifying in court, which then which is a bona fide aspect of their job that they have to be able to do. So really, this is less about us disagreeing about things other than to say my burden of proof around truthfulness is much higher. And Mark and I've had these conversations for years now as we've worked together. It's just, you know, the issue of perception, the not having something in the report that shows up on the body cam and whether that was intentional or not. And as the auditor's office has to be responsive and trying to find an allegation. Unfortunately, truthfulness has a tendency to show up many times. In some cases, it absolutely is appropriate, and there's so much there to suggest for me that it's time to sustain that and think about separation from employment, or the outcome of the discipline was likely separation of employment, or it is more of a perception-based thing and those types of things. So that's why it's insufficient evidence for me on this, is because I have the duty, the benefit, the heavy weight of making sure that, you know, I'm the final say on your employment status. And ultimately, if challenged, I'm also the one that has to defend the action against, you know, wrongful termination and some of those things. And so because of that, my burden of proof is quite a bit higher than that. It's more beyond a reasonable doubt for me than it is just either reasonable suspicion or just a little percent.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I make just one really quick comment? So Monique, back to like your question, I finally think I fully understand it. The other thing is, with the search, it doesn't matter if the frame of mind of the officer is irrelevant in that particular allegation. So if the search wasn't a good search in terms of the policy violation, their frame of mind isn't part of how we decide whether it's sustained or not sustained. If the search occurred and it wasn't allowable then it's a sustained allegation regardless of intentionality. And I don't disagree that I think the intentionality was never the concern. It was just was this an allowable search or was this not an allowable search? So just to clarify.
No?
Okay. Can we go back to the?
You looking for this one?
Yes. Let's do that. Alright. The truthfulness, thank you, Chief, that made me think actually, because I was leaning or feeling a certain way, but that put it into a broader perspective for me. And I don't have the exact language of what the report said right in front of me, so I think that's kind of what brought really that point of misunderstanding maybe in their frame of mind, where it may not have been dishonesty if they don't understand they were being dishonest. My feeling is just that they should have expanded more about what was actually occurring in that report, such as the request by other officers to obtain a warrant, I think would have been relevant. The second part, the search and seizure for the bond winning. It seems pretty straightforward, and just kind of on the search and seizure where everyone said unfounded, yeah. Mhm.
The second one right here, right?
Yeah. I comment on that seems straightforward, actually. Okay, my brain is blank there.
Brittany?
We're not sharing our thoughts, we're just discussing
You,
comments.
you
that
can
we
share your
went
thoughts if you want to. I'm just
through, like where
gonna
we landed.
have a round where I ask you to say what you
Oh, okay.
agree with or
Thank
disagree.
you.
Yeah.
For the truthfulness one, for me, there was some audio at one point where the primary officer was kind of like repeating back to the other officer saying, I wrote it down, but you handed it to me and I just put it on the ground, and it was like the re-emphasis, like the retelling of what happened and retelling it wrong, but kind of in this reassuring tone of like, this is what we agree on, that just happened, right? That just kind of flagged to me of like, oh, there's a vibe that like something's being kind of covered up here. So that caught my attention, and that prompted me to indicate sustained on that one. And then the only other thoughts I have is back to the second search and seizure regarding the coercion. Kind of what I was already speaking to before. Initially, I had actually wondered about unfounded on that, because initially when I was watching the officer's interactions with the victim, again, it seemed like he was hoping to ensure the victim was well informed. But as I continued watching, I changed my mind because the victim continued to state, I do not give consent, or something to that effect. And it seemed like the officer continued to engage past the point. And it also, my understanding was the outcome either way was that victim would be facing some charges, and there was no like getting the victim off without anything as an outcome. So I didn't quite know what the officer's goal was in that, other than trying to ease the need to get the warrant. So anyways, I just a comment that one really did hang me up because of the humanity of the situation. Yeah.
Good.
I would go along with the officer with the chain of command and chief on all the charges. D,
And C also.
C also, Rich.
Any other comments?
Right.
Great, so we'll go back around. I'm just gonna say, so that we can have, unless you want to say something before I say what I agree with and disagree.
Well, I was thought I'm trying to remember in the report, the statement was they argued, I almost argued, they wrote a plain view for the search, right? Wasn't it correctly?
So,
Would it possible to get the officer Peckle to explain just what that would mean for them?
what plain view means?
For officer, for what, like it would constitute plain view?
How would you interpret plain view, like if you were reading that in the, or heard that in the interview, yeah, Sergeant Bill.
Changes.
Yeah, also changes,
Yeah. But I mean, for the most part, again, without manipulation, like you're able to walk up and without any kind of manipulation, you can see it. You don't have to open the bag. Realistically, again, depending on the circumstances, not even have to touch the bag. But again, I think that's circumstantial too. There's times where you might be justified in grabbing the bag, carrying it to the front of a patrol car, setting it down. And as long as it's just a set down, you could get there.
Mhm.
But again, it's very minimal to no manipulation of the bag, changing the environment the bag was in whatsoever. You walk up, the environment's the same, and you can see whatever it is you're looking for.
I was trying to get out of Miami defense attorney brain.
Monique, can you let me know what you think for the allegations on each count?
Yeah,
If you agree with the row, that's fine, or if you want to say specifically.
F1. Thank you. So for the truthfulness allegation, I agree with the auditor. For the search and seizure allegation, I agree with both the chief and the chief, the chain of command and the auditor. I feel like D also, I agree with the auditor that it was insufficient evidence. Perhaps there was more to be desired to make a decision, and not all of the evidence was available to make that decision. And then the last one is, I believe, yeah.
I understand what you want to read it.
I will say that I agree with. It's just interesting that a truthful allegation is. Well, they sustained it and then have insufficient evidence here for the reporting. Evidence submission. So
Well, different officer, right? Officer C,
Oh,
the officer who filed the report, who found the bag.
F found the bag.
F found the bag.
C, the one who carried it, gave it to D.
Carried it.
And he-
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I've been studying for this
Yes.
moment, so.
Yeah. Carried the bag to Officer D.
Okay.
And
Yeah, he's the F,
And
you
is-
know, F's the original finder.
Yeah.
so I agree with the auditor that it was insufficient evidence.
Okay, great. No,
I got myself confused on this. We can go back to Officer D. Is that right? We said that.
Yes.
Before, okay. Truthfulness, after it's kind of funny, I think I would agree with the auditor on that point. And then with both the chief. Or with the chief on. The search and seizure for the second, or first search and seizure and for the second search and seizure. And then for officer, this is whereas it was officer carried the bag.
who carried the bag, who is the more junior officer?
Yes. There's so many
do you
people in
define
the
this?
video footage.
Yeah,
C's the one who carried it, talked to Supervisor A and said that C said C's gonna get a search warrant, but then E was the actual affiant. And D's the one who's the more senior officer that ended up doing the manipulating, fondling, whatever you wanna say.
And, okay, but if I recall, C was there, like bearing witness to the flashlighting, then I would. This will agree with the auditor.
ready?
Yeah, I've sustained for the first and the second. And insufficient evidence for the third and unfounded for the fourth.
Rick, I got yours, but do you have anything else to share?
No additional comments, no, thank you.
I agree with, it's mixed. Okay, insufficient evidence for the first, sustained for the second, and insufficient evidence for the third for Officer D, and then unfounded for Officer C. That's done. All right, any closing comments?
Can I just make a
yeah.
comment? And I know you guys grapple with this, and I think any of us that are in this space unfounded and insufficient evidence are like cousins when it comes to this. I mean, you could go either way, right? It's really hard sometimes. One of the things that we try to do is, as best we can, and Cindy and I have this conversation all the time, is, trying to determine when it's unfounded as to whether or not the allegation as suggested occurred or not. Versus, like for instance, we'll take the coercion piece. There could be some level of coercion that happens and be perfectly within policy, and that would be. But in that particular case, when I was thinking about unfounded, it's hard for me to land on seeing whether there was any coercion actually occurred, because coercion is seen through the perception and eyes of who's being coerced, not necessarily who is doing the coercion. Sometimes it's really obvious. So there's always really, really egregious things that are obvious. So that's how I landed on just unfounded, is that I am just not sure that there was coercion that existed in that space. And I totally get where the auditor might think, well, there just wasn't enough evidence to suggest there wasn't coercion, so it's insufficient evidence. Same with the other officer around the reports. The absence of details in the report for me harkens back to if every officer's report, if we're worried about every officer's report having every piece of information in it that we hope that it has, then we're gonna be sorely underwhelmed, because there's a level of mistakes that are made as we go back and try and write the reports. We'll leave things out, and it's not intentional, it just happens. And so that was the other thing for me, is whether or not there was some intentionality around leaving things out, if it like purposefully omitted things, or if as a fairly brand new young officer, it didn't even occur to you to put it in your report type of thing. Now that's a training issue, right? I'd get back into that and be like, hey, youngster, in hindsight, these are the types of things that need to show up in the report, and give some remedial training and be able to do it. So that's why I landed on unfounded, is because I don't think that it actually occurred kind of the way that it potentially could have, if there was some level of either knowingly or intentionally doing that. But they're cousins to each other. I don't split those hairs with the auditor. And the last thing I would say to this group is I appreciate you so much, and how thoughtful you are in the process. And I don't, as much as Beatrice gives me a hard time, I don't keep score. You guys disagree with me anytime you need to disagree with me. I don't ever want to be seen as coming here trying to win you over with my arguments. But I do think it's good for whether it's deputy chief or myself here to just kind of hear what we go through in deliberations, so that you know that we're equally as thoughtful when we do this as you guys are.
Well, I'll say, yeah, that it's been valuable to have your perspective and Sergeant Michael's perspective and the information that we are trying to grapple with today, and also yours, Lindsay. So Lindsay, do you have a counterpoint to this?
Oh my, no, I don't have a counterpoint. I would just say, when I guess, I think about insufficient evidence a little bit differently. If I want to be able to demonstrably prove if something is unfounded, it did not happen. That's my standard. So there are times when, especially these days, when we have such great footage or evidence submitted by community members or other things, where I can look at something and say it did not occur. I can also say it's pretty rare that those things end up here at this table, right? Those things get bounced way farther down in the process, because I can say they didn't happen, often very early in the investigatory stages. So the odds that those kinds of things would end up in an allegation are extremely rare. Just based on my own personal experience, right? I'm not speaking for all time. So based on 3 years of knowledge. So for me, insufficient evidence is more, I can't disprove it. So when it comes to something like the perception of coercion, You know, I suppose in hindsight, like an investigatory step that could have been taken would be to interview the person and ask her, did you feel coerced? I mean, in theory, could that be something we asked to do? Maybe, I don't know. Would that be wise? I don't know. But you know, there are pieces of information that I don't have, and the information I do have didn't to me in these cases disprove it. Now, I 100% agree with the chief that this comes down to like hair splitting at a certain point. I can't say that I think that if 51% happened. So we have this other bucket so that we don't have some massive disagreement in terms of like between unfounded and insufficient evidence, but that I am kind of picky about the distinction between the two. That's all.
And we've heard about that before in previous cases, so thanks for providing both of those.
I mean, honestly, I think that's a good problem to have, that the main disagreements between the auditor's office and the chain of command happen to be around those two, right? It is rarer that we are disagreeing on, is it sustained or is it the other two? It's more often that we disagree on these finer points of, we're not sure that we think it probably didn't happen, right? That's a good problem to have.
Your issues show up when one of us says sustained and the other one says within policy.
Right.
That's the real divergence that we should be looking into, right? Yeah,
Totally.
We're pretty aligned most of the time, yeah.
Often,
would-
yeah.
Like, on the coercion issue, and maybe it was an opportunity to have a legal analysis, is police officers are given a lot of latitude by the courts to say something to people, to get them to come forward with any evidence or statements. Oh, Johnny said you fired the gun first, and then you come back and, well, Billy says you fired the gun first, and even though they already know that one person said it. So it would have been nice, and I don't know how the laws are, I haven't been around for a while in Oregon, but they are given a significant amount of latitude of what they can say to a person, even if it's not true, in order to solicit a response from someone. And I think maybe that was what was missing in this case, was that legal analysis on what that officer did, because I don't know on a search case like this, whether they get that same latitude as they are, for example, in breaking, like a breaking and entering. Well, Johnny said, you kicked in the door, and I went, no, well, he kicked in the door, kind of thing. Even though they already know who kicked in the door. So if that makes any sense, but again, a legal analysis of that would have been probably helpful. If you're gonna bring forward an allegation like coercion.
Right, thank you. Well, to keep us hopefully close to time, maybe we should move on to the auditor's report.
Get out, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Chief.
It's
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you bet.
one of his brews has a basketball game tonight, so. To go with that. Let's see. So, we went to the Asian community and Polynesian community, and that NAACP organized a community meeting, I guess, to discuss crimes that are occurring against
The Asian.
well,
community.
yeah, the higher socioeconomic member of the Asian community, burglaries. And so there was a community meeting about that, and as the chief and Skinner and Chief Shear from the Springfield chief were on the dais, and you really don't ever want to share the dais with him on anything, just FYI. He was very candid as he could be, because the case was under investigation. And ironically enough, as Beatrice found, as she always does, they arrested a whole bunch of people today for about 40 crimes against the Asian community in Oregon. And so a lot of law enforcement agencies were involved in that. So it was very important to them, as all of them are. I do have some disconnects about how burglaries are dispatched and things like that, but it was actually a very good meeting. And I think, nearly everyone, if not everyone, came away first understanding the process and how they go through this process. And number two, the acceptance of some degree of responsibility that we all have in hardening our targets, if you will, so that we're not so easily susceptible to being victims of burglaries and things like that. So it actually, I thought worked out pretty well, right?
Yeah.
And again, Beatrice helped bring some folks to the table. In terms, you mentioned the budget earlier, I don't think we were gonna be impacted in any case. For the 2-year biennium, we are gonna be under budget by 6 figures, it looks like. So, that's a, good thing for us. As we often are, I have to admit that seminar in Seychelles sounded really good. But nevertheless, we do come under budget nearly every year. Last year, we only had 12 allegations. So I think that's just a combination of things. I see a really good group of officers, a lot of young officers that are really doing a lot of good work. They don't necessarily get credit. It's still hard for this community to wrap their arms around the police department after things that have occurred in the past. But we only had 12 allegations, probably at least half we opened and internally opened. If someone complains now of something serious, we already know about it before someone in the community complains about it. It's pretty darn rare that we don't hear about something. This year, we already have 49 complaints, but I don't think any of them are allegations yet, maybe today. But a whole variety of different things, either involving arrest or response time. Response time or how they respond is probably still the number one thing that we get. And prioritization of calls. And I've had that discussion about more, do they go to a burglary, which is a high degree felony, if the person who calls says no, they're gone, or do they go to where there's a person laying in your front yard yelling at a tree? And they'll typically go to where the person is. And meanwhile, the one who's been traumatized by a burglary must wait for however long it takes to wait. And I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that prioritization. But again, that's just my personal opinion. But I think it's something that hopefully they'll look at over the long term, because now they have, I think the latest FBI statistics for 2023, they had 420 burglaries. Now, I don't know if that included like outer, like garages, or if it just includes homes, but the latest stats were 420. So it's more than one a day, but not much more than one a day. And I hope the department takes a look at, why can't we carve out 5 minutes somewhere from an officer to go to that house and the people form to fill out, walk around and make sure that the bad guy's still not there and leave. And I think that would really improve the image of the department on response times and things like that. But again, that's just my personal feeling, having been victimized in a home burglary. So I have some, I have some feelings about that. What else do I got here? So the case that you were talking about, I'm sure, from police commission last week. I'm not great with the Zoom, not as good as Rob. We're close.
Breaking second now.
I don't like the owl. I've been retired for 3 years, but I would have indicated that I had reviewed all the body worn cameras, angles and things like that in that case. I am not bringing forward any allegations against those officers. I did classify it as an incident review simply because it caught the attention of a lot of folks. And I wanted IA to compile all the information into one place. So that if you guys decide to review it or don't review it, that we have all that information. So it was classified as an incident review. Out of respect for his due process. I'm trying to find out right now because I know the court date wasn't until February. I'm not gonna really comment on what I saw, other than the fact that I'm not bringing forward any allegations on the use of force or the arrest or anything like that. So, and it's about 2 hours, if any of you are interested in. If you want to review it at some point in the future, it's about 2 hours long.
This is an incident that was brought up brought up by somebody on the police commission.
No, it was on social media. It was a registered guard. It was a traffic stop, DUI traffic stop of a gentleman, that was in the newspaper and it was on. It caught some play in social media on Reddit and things like that. It was brought to my attention on Reddit. Someone saw it on Reddit for this, there's a City of Eugene Reddit apparently. And so, and given the nature of what was written, I asked for the body worn camera and watched. And so, again, not bringing forth any allegations, but you all have the opportunity. And I was gonna say that on the police commission, but I couldn't get hooked into the commission because I know it was asked. So you guys get to know first, 2 days before the police commission.
Would you like to grant access so they can review it and we could discuss it at the next CRB to see if?
I won't have it. Well, I'm gonna wait until the court case is over. Out of respect for his due process. He complained in the newspaper, and I think an employee of his complained on Reddit, but he did not complain. Nevertheless, it, caught enough attention that I just wanted to take a look at it. And so I did.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. The body worn, and God bless Aaron from Cindy Coleman's office, who's always getting us videos and transmissions and things like that. It was, I know it's a lot of work but it makes our jobs a lot easier. And he said, she said kind of thing. Well, you got it on film, so.
She's listening to you right now, so
Who?
Aaron, she's on.
Oh, hi.
Well, for the thanks, that's why.
Yeah, she's done that, I mean, fairly recently. I think we had a sustained allegation and Sergeant Peckles wrote a really good memo. And I wanted to compliment you on that. It was really well done. And that always makes our job easier. And then I wrote a commendation for 3 officers, because one of the things that that has been important to me, especially in a community like Eugene, is the professionalism of officers. And in fact, that was some of what Officer Peckles was worked on his case. And so 3 officers had to take, I think you remember the story about the guy that was throwing stuff off the roof and all that, and SWAT came out and all that. But the 3 officers who were assigned to take the man to the hospital were subjected to less than complimentary words from that person through most of that visit, and those officers showed great poise and professionalism and not responding and just doing their jobs and not getting angry or anything like that. So I wrote a commendation. Not sure I would have had the patience for that type of behavior, but I don't wear a gun and carry a badge either, so I wanted to make that known. My personal, another thing that was important to Leah and is important to me is pursuits, high-speed chases of stupid things like stolen cars. And I'm seeing anecdotally a reduction in that. third of the people killed in those, every year, which is about 300 people nationwide. About 100 of them are innocent people. And for things like stolen cars, we shouldn't be racing through downtown and everywhere else over something like that. Rapists, robbers and murderers, everybody get out of the way. But stolen cars and things like that, and I've seen a great deal of attention to that. And it was ironic when the chief was talking about reports, because some of these reports look like a Greek tragedy in 6 acts. And so I suggested that they try to be briefer so that they have more time to be out. And I've seen this week or last week, I think I saw 4 or 5 one-page reports that covered all the details. And I was really impressed by that. And again, that message I think is getting conveyed as well. Other than that, I think that's probably about where we are, as Carrie said. The process, I don't really know what's going on with the process at this point. I'm certain I'll have input when the time comes. And I offered, given, if you've been following the budget situation in the city, given the budget situation in the city, I knew the council was gonna need more time. And so I was able to carve out another 5 weeks to give them a little bit more time. So, but beyond that, I'm the last person to know, what's going on. So April 25th, it will be my last day, and April 26th, I'm going home. So good luck to y'all. Oh, and the CRB process, because I think 3, potentially 4 openings, right?
Yes.
They surprised us with a vigorous timetable. So we actually had to shift gears a little bit to get that timetable worked out. So we're not gonna have, I interact with the mayor to choose people to rank candidates, and then council gets those rankings. May or may not pick the folks on how they're ranking. But we usually have a meeting for that because of the time crunch. We weren't able to do that, and we're not required to have a public meeting on that. We always like to in the past, but we really got squeezed on time this time, so people are just scoring remotely, and we had a number of good people, and then the AIS comes out and will have all the information about who those people were. But I appreciate everybody's work and all the work that you've done and volunteering for the community. It's really wonderful. Clay was at South, I don't know the acronym.
Southwest Hills Neighborhood Association.
Yeah, this man gets out, and I really admire all your volunteer service, and everybody has volunteer service to the community. Brittany helped on a program with the Lane County Behavioral Mental Health. She was part of the effort to kick that off the ground, I think. And so really looking forward to them being far more involved in the behavioral health and mental health community with Lane County under some great leadership and some great counsel. So I think that's going to work out really well. I think that's it. Anybody got any questions?
Thank you for filling in, Clay.
Thank you.
I'm doing a poor job, but thank you,
Fire
Albert.
from chair, huh?
We do need to provide some time for public comment if there are any people in the public who are here. Please, if you are a member of the public and want to raise your hand in Zoom. If you have a comment. We are not seeing any raised hands, so we will move on from public comment. Thank you for joining us. To closing comments. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. All right, it was a great meeting. It was good to have the chief here to hear his explanation on the case that we were discussing. It was also, it was something to have him talk about the culture audit. I still need more time to think about that. I just am a little disappointed that this was one of the suggestions or one of the solutions that was offered to the problem that we were talking about. And now we have I just don't know why that was offered to us if we were never going to be able to see the result of that impact. And I think that's all I have.
I thought it was a good meeting. But I want to, it's a pretty spot. I don't know what this culture report was, it wasn't around for that, so. Did not understand the first part, but it was still interesting. I think that's it. And thank you, Rob, for explaining all those officers every which way, because I was so confused. Great.
I appreciated knowing I was not the only one confused by a lot of this case, but found it really helpful and appreciated having Chief here as well.
No comments.
Yeah, again, appreciate the folks in the room who help us understand this stuff. And thank you, Sergeant Pickles. We did put you on the spot a lot today, and as we did with the chief, so thanks for being up for that. I will ask if the chair wants to request the cultural audit executive summary that the chief mentioned, so that we're provided with the same sort of information that's available to the police commission. And then also ask the chair if he wants to request to review the case that you were referring to, that the police commission asked about.
They won't get to redo it.
No, our chair,
Yeah,
our real chair,
oh.
who I am not. But otherwise, yeah, thanks everyone, and sorry I did not do a good job of timing.
If we, come to think of it, and I'm not gonna disclose the circumstances. It might be a good idea to appoint, for this board to appoint interim chair or vice chair or third chair. And this is a good opportunity to do that. I would recommend that you guys make a motion to, if you will.
Meaning like Jose's not gonna be here next meeting.
I'm not gonna disclose anything, but, and Carolyn may be stepping away, so we may be in the same situation next month as we are this month. And maybe this is just a good opportunity to have someone already in place, just in case neither one of those can make the next meeting.
Rick told me he likes Clay.
Can it be a very temporary basis?
I'm kidding.
But yeah,
I guess the point is that if we don't have a chair to serve, to help create the next meeting, right? Doesn't the chair
Right,
do some
right.
work in
Yeah,
advance?
yeah.
I'm not aware of.
Talk about that offline.
but having a second interim chair might be helpful for us.
Like two vice chairs
Yeah,
that we should vote on, right?
yeah.
If
Yeah.
allowed,
Carolyn's off the next 2 meetings, is that right?
Yeah.
well,
I see.
We have cake for her too, because I'm a little unsure about it. She's.
Did you already get it?
Oh, yeah. You told she told me she wasn't gonna come about 5 minutes after. I
Oh, no.
ordered it.
Oh,
So,
no.
see her. It's all good, we'll get another one too.
We'll enjoy your cake. I do not need to be in this role, just to say, I'm happy to do it if we need someone there, but anyone else who would like to, sounds like Rick doesn't want to do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think Clay would be a wonderful.
And we need two.
You did a nice job.
The auditor is suggesting that we need two, so is anyone else interested?
Well, you just wanna, just
For
one
backup.
person, a motion for one person to serve as the backup.
Oh.
To the,
In
to the
addition.
vice
I see.
chair.
Yeah.
Yeah. in
We
addition.
just, one backup.
And you only really
Yeah.
need it for 2 meetings.
Yeah.
Because then we'll know what, if Carolyn's coming back and.
Yeah.
Because she's taking the leave of absence, that's what put Clay in the
Mhm.
pinch hitting role tonight.
So it'd just be better to have an interim second vice chair. Motion?
can we just say for the next meeting then, does that
For
make
the
you feel
next,
better?
and maybe there's a role that's just the next meetings, well,
Okay,
Yeah.
good. You
it
want-
doesn't need to be a time-based thing.
just-
Okay,
But
so
it's-
then I move to make Clay the interim, the second interim.
Interim
vice chair.
vice chair.
Second interim vice
Interim vice
chair.
chair.
There we go.
Second.
Okay. Can we have
These
vote?
meetings are always fun.
Oh, yeah, well,
Vote to approve, sorry, who votes in favor of this motion?
Do you?
I don't know. No one's opposed or abstained, so that's fine. I will do that and
Thank you.
figure out what that means for the next couple of months if needed. I will be here. I won't be here in the summer though, so if this extends to summer, then someone else.
Oh,
will be checking that.
No more than 2 meetings.
I won't hear.
I'm not gonna call it
April 25th,
Italy.
he's
okay?
gone.
So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And
He and his tax